The autistic brain. Autistic genius despite the struggle with sensory overload versus the Snowflake generation. So right now we have some interesting discussion about empathy or the lack of it, and how we as autistics struggle just going to work every day, having to get up, dress, and then drive to work, and then being at work, having all that pressure, and in addition to that, all the sensory input all around you. And it's not just the noise. It's too much information overall. All at once, sometimes. It's a lot to deal with for an autistic. And that's a real stressor. I thought it would make a very interesting comparison with the generation Snowflake, because sometimes autistics are thrown into this Snowflake generation, and it's very unfair. So I want to clear up this misunderstanding, point out the differences. So this is very different from a person who is really sensitive. There is also the highly sensitive type of neurotypical. Well, this is a bit idealistic, I would say. And my guess is that some who identify as highly sensitive person might actually be on the autistic spectrum. That exists as well. And then you have the autistic, which is again very different. Cerebral cortex. Detailed microscopic study suggests that there may be an increased number of connections between some of the neurons in this brain region. And the amygdala is often too large in young people with autism. The hippocampus is bigger in many people with autism. Temporal lobe. Many studies indicate that this part of the brain has altered neurons and connections. The glia. Evidence suggests that some types of glial cells are too active in autism. Cerebellum. About half of the people with autism have a smaller number of specific type of cell called Purkinje cells in the cerebellum. So there is a real brain difference between neurotypicals and autistics. And that's what makes autistic tick in a different way and feeling stressed more easily. And that's not based on opinion or by feeling offended, but it's because the brain works in a very different way. Of course, you can have a combination of those, but I'm not getting into that. I just want to clearly make the distinction between an autistic who is really stressed out from everything on a daily basis and needs to recover in silence just to calm down the system and the brain, and then the snowflake who, I don't know how to input it, but seems to have an opinion on everything, even though it might not come necessarily from a well-researched place. So the origins of the term snowflake. It's now used as an insult to describe someone who is overly sensitive or as feeling entitled to special treatment or consideration. And that's the very big difference between an ASPE or autistic who is really, really stressed out and it's physical, and somebody who just thinks they deserve special treatment just like that. Of course, not all snowflakes are narcissistic, but whenever I encounter a person who acts entitled, I just run for the hills, and I find it unfair that those that act like this, very narcissistic, are those that sometimes get that special treatment. But those who struggle but have no visible disability just get invalidated and gaslighted and shamed even. It seems really unfair. Autistics often have a combination of those: anxiety, ADHD, chronic fatigue. Sometimes they are diabetic, learning disabilities, PTSD, hearing loss, sleep disorders, visual impairments, depression, gastrointestinal disorders, migraine headaches. So it's a combination of all of those, and it's not visible, but we just struggle. suffer in silence sometimes, and all we would need is an ASPE-friendly environment. Then we can actually thrive and give our best. We are rather, I would say, the opposite of snowflakes. If we feel turned on, we can really dive into it, go for hours. This is so true. Special interests which do not cause harm should be encouraged, not thwarted. And Temple Grandin says, I strongly recommend that students with autism get involved in special interest clubs in some of the areas they naturally excel at. Being with people who share your interests makes socializing easier. And that's so true. It's always about the special interest. When you share that with another person, that's what connects you. It's not about personality for an autistic. It's about sharing in the same passion. This is what turns you on. And we really offer very high quality of work when we feel comfortable, when we feel accepted and understood. It's interesting that in the 1970s, snowflake was a disparaging term for a white man or for a black man who was seen as acting white. It was also used as a slang term for cocaine. But before either of those, it was used for a time with a very particular political meaning. In Missouri in the early 1860s, a snowflake was a person who was opposed to the abolition of slavery. The implication of the name being that such people valued white people over black people. The snowflakes hoped slavery would survive the country's civil war and were contrasted with two other groups. Meanwhile, the use of Generation Snowflake is often traced back to Claire Fox and her book. I find that offensive. And this has actually brought upon us political correctness. And nowadays, you can say the wrong thing very easily. And autistics probably struggle with that a lot. Because sometimes we just blurt out what is on our mind. And that is not necessarily politically correct. And in my opinion, political correctness is just a way to shut you up. And debate is no longer possible. Sensitive students, or probably also autistics, are often tarred with the Generation Snowflake brush as well. Who is part of Generation Snowflake? Generation Snowflake is a put-down used to describe the current generation of sensitive millennials who are offended by everything. When I think what kind of abuse I have faced, and I know other autistics as well, we so often hear people tell us stuff that is actually very painful because it's so invalidating and inconsiderate, because we really give everything. We struggle so hard to just keep up. And then when somebody comes and says, that's not good enough, that's really crushing. Words can really, kill you inside. Very demoralizing. And it's abuse. And this is why I am making this video, because Carol Bird just released a video where she talks about this. We are faced with verbal abuse. Very often as autistics. And it brought up a lot of my own memories. So, yes, over all those years I have been working as employee of different companies, especially when I didn't know that I was autistic. Of course, I just tried to cope and give my best. But I remember I told my boss that the work was overwhelming, it was too much, and she didn't believe me. She didn't take it seriously, and the result of that, I had an autistic burnout. And since then, this burnout really hurt me physically. I became exercise intolerant. I developed a histamine intolerance. A summer heat intolerance. All of that. And since then, I would say I really had this chronic fatigue, feeling exhausted from just a little bit of exercise. And also at work, I stopped completely to run up and down to the basement. I remained at the cashier for the remainder of the time I worked there. I didn't have enough energy anymore. and that was the time when really I started to pull out of everything. I just stopped. It took me years to recover from that autistic burnout, and I needed to change my whole way of eating through carnivory, heal my body, so that I no longer was in physical pain. In 2007, after that burnout, I had regular migraines. I felt exhausted all the time, as I said. Muscle pain, back pain, hip pain, all that inflammation going on. Well, whenever I overexert myself physically, that can even be by enjoying too much exercise, my body starts to hurt again. I either get a migraine or I have pain in my legs and arms, or back pain, or all of it together. By now I know it is histamine related, so I can take a DAO supplement, but sometimes even that just doesn't cover it. And then I have to wait for 1 or 3 days until my system has reset and recharged. Doing very little activity. That's just the way it is. I've grown used to it. What can you do? It's just the way it is. In school, as a teenager, it was so hard. Or during the apprenticeship, many times I wanted to just pull out and not be here anymore. It was that difficult. It can crush you. Words are like a sword pierce through you, especially when you give everything and try so bloody hard. And it is still not good enough. They tell you you seem unmotivated. That's really so painful. When you hear that, you seem unmotivated. That's so not true. You just struggle. And this takes a lot of energy. Every change a company makes is stressful because, again, you have to unlearn, do something different. You just have been trying to do the old routine and you got good at it. So you like things to stay the way they are, because finally you can relax and feel a little bit safe. And then the company introduces a change, and sometimes many changes all at once, then you fall apart. It's too much on your system because you are already at your limit from all you can take. So it's never that you are not motivated. You give your everything. And you are just stressed. I give everything I have. And it still seems not good enough. And therefore I can so relate. You are at the end of your rope, and this is exactly how it feels like. And I have cut myself off from all people because after work all I need is solitude and silence. And I socially interact online, but apart from that, it's very rare that I go and meet somebody in person, because I just don't have the energy. I need all the time to recover from work. And I do need to do that in solitude. Giving you the feeling that you are the only one that is so weird and has issue with this, shaming you even for being so sensitive, feeling belittled. Yeah, and that brings back this memory. And it's just one example of many. I had a coworker banging at the window from the outside. I really jumped. It was so unexpected. And this enraged me so much. I could have strangled him. I was there in the morning. I'm not a morning person. So I was there, not entirely awake, peacefully listening to an audiobook and preparing the train restaurant for customers, putting napkins on the table, being in my own world. And then, so unexpectedly, my stupid coworker just bangs with his fist on the window from outside. That was so loud. And this totally inconsiderate action cost me my peace of mind. It took me 2 hours to calm down. And as a result, I could not serve the customers well. I was so angry and in such a bad mood because I was stressed. And it's physical. You can't just cognitively tell yourself, oh, it was just your coworker, and then be all happy again. It doesn't work like that. Your nervous system overreacts to such a fright. And in my case, this kind of stress will also raise the histamine level. And sometimes the histamine bucket then overflows. And from that I get all kinds of physical and mental reactions. So your heartbeat is faster. You may suddenly feel gassy or have an upset stomach. I don't have asthma, luckily, but I can get a runny nose. Adrenaline is released. I can start to sweat, get hot flashes. Sometimes I feel like crying, I feel sad. And then on the way back, unfortunately, that coworker had to move from his train to my train. So I told him, please don't ever do that. You gave me such a fright. And all he said was, oh, you are the only one that has an issue with this. Nobody is so sensitive as you. So instead of apologizing, he just shamed me on top of freaking the shit out of me. So my day was finished. Of course, not every day is like that, and this is one obnoxious coworker. I really don't like him. He is acting very narcissistic, always making me feel he is so superior to me because he has no issues with anything I struggle with. And he is a male, and then he looks down on me as a woman. Yeah, so and then you think, damn, I just wish I could be normal, whatever that means, neurotypical, and not struggle with all those things. Because it would be much easier to cope, and then you could actually go to work without feeling stressed and not be that exhausted after work. And then also you just feel you don't belong. You are a weirdo. You feel like an alien. And that is a lonely existence sometimes, despite the fact that I really like my solitude. And yes, I feel I was born in the wrong country. I feel so at home in the UK's because that's basically Aspie land. You can be weird and they just call it eccentric and are proud of it. So it might be a little bit easier to be an Aspie. But I might be wrong about that. Because Aspies are getting bullied everywhere. You are still an autistic in neurotypical land. And thus you stand out. You don't like to socialize after work. Go have a drink or something like this. You just want to go home, have your peace, your solitude, your silence. You don't need additional input. And that brings us to the question of happiness.
Anybody else? Being happy is, for me, is being active, like playing tennis. You're lost in the flow. You don't worry about anything, that you're just enjoying. Yeah, yeah. Does anybody else feel like that around sport or interests or activities where everything else is just gone and you're in your world, just totally immersed in that? Yeah.
Being able to be on my own, I find myself a lot happier when I'm a lot of times away from other people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Why do you think that is? Is it just about being calm, being to choose what you're doing?
I don't know. I just find myself more comfortable sometimes when I'm on my own rather than being surrounded by others.
Yeah. Does anybody else find that their happiest moments are generally when you're by yourself? Yeah.
So that's the big difference. Aspies, autistics, they are happiest when they can dive into whatever their special interest is, be by themselves, merging with whatever they are doing, which is called the flow, that incredible state of being and feel inspired and awake and thrive, and that usually for an autistic excludes other people. I'm not saying everybody is like that. You can have a very great time with a good friend, an inspiring discussion, and that's very enjoyable for a certain amount of time, but then you need to get back to being by yourself.
Yes, elated, good word, yeah. It's brilliant just to master something, isn't it? To know something. Yeah, a little calculation comes together, or you make something, or you paint something. I think there is that success, yeah.
Yeah, it's similar
Success.
to an achievement.
Yeah.
Yes.
Decorate the house or something.
Yes.
A lot of anxiety and stress doing it, but then when you've done it,
Yeah.
or helping somebody, that's just an example.
Yeah, yeah.
On fulfilling.
So it's about completing, sometimes about perfection, about just, as you say, that achievement of doing something quite tangible.
Whether it's for myself or helping somebody else, or no matter what it is. But
it's doing. Which is back to that idea of function and purpose, I think, which I think for a lot of autistic people is really important, this idea of being useful and practical and valuable, that if I'm not doing something, what's the point of me? Does that make sense to anybody else? That you're just sort of like,
Absolutely.
It's just, I've got to be useful, even if it's nothing particularly useful. It's got to feel meaningful to you. So I asked a bunch of, I went on Twitter quite some time ago, and I asked a bunch of autistic people what made them happy, and these are some of the things that some of them said. And you see whether you relate to any of these particular ideas. So we have the OCD stim buzz of all being what it should be, the way your guts need it to be, linear, ordered, and corresponding with your inner models. That's autistic happiness for you. Order, things being right, people not moving things, everything being as it should. Complete control over the amount of outside world that gets into my inside world. Uninterrupted development of my interests. Doing what I like without other people getting in the way of what I do. And as you said, Dream, absence. And time again, this is just a little selection, people were saying absence of anxiety, absence of stress, absence of fear. So it really feels that the bar for a lot of autistic people is below neutral. And as you said, Dream, that it's the best we can hope for is not to feel stressed. And that's really, I find that a bit sad. Absolutely. But that's how people feel. And I get that. But and that's quite a bleak message to put out there, to say it's never going to get any better than okay. And of course it does. Of course we have those moments of joy and all of that kind of thing. But it's that recognition that underneath all of that, life's a bit stressful quite a lot of the time, even if it's in quite a low-key kind of a way, in a way that perhaps it isn't for non-autistic people, that their lives are different, different stresses, but different things. And the bottom one here is particularly cheery. It is the human purpose, a genetically ingrained construct which drives us to feel joy in moments of achievement or contentment. These fleeting moments are enough to drive us like addicts to strive and struggle in the hope of feeling the sensation again. That's a cheery message of happiness from a lovely autistic person. Differences, and I've done this presentation dozens of times, and I ask the audience, what do you think the people in your care, your autistic people in your care, makes them happy? And they say exactly the same, quite different things. And the differences very much seem to be that for non-autistic people, people are absolutely key to their well-being, to their sense of self-worth, to their enjoyment in any way, shape or form, connecting with people, thinking about people, contacting people. People are a huge, huge part. And that's not to say that for autistic people, people are not important. Absolutely not. But it's not necessarily the first thing that wakes you up in the morning is a thought about a person. And it's not necessarily the things that you are constantly pondering and doing and seeking. Whereas for autistic people, it was very much this absence of negativity and an enjoyment of certainty, an enjoyment of order, an enjoyment of interests. Certainly that people are there, but they're not necessarily number one in your general sense of well-being. Do you think that's roughly true? I mean, we're talking very, very big and generalising and generically here, but this comes up every single time. I do it like a little magic test, and it works every single time. That the audience, who are largely non-autistic, will tell me that the autistic people in their lives, in their care, are made happy by different things than they are, and yet they spend their lives trying to send these kids to social groups. So they kind of know that there's this weird paradox here. I know what makes this person happy, but it's not what makes me happy. So I'm just going to continue encourage them to have variety and change and social stuff and overwhelming sensory experiences, even though they can actually identify it in their own words. And that really is the point of this presentation to a professional audience, is to say, you know the answer already, and yet you still think this person needs more friends, more variety, more change in their lives. So I'm kind of pleased that you roughly kind of agree that this message is that there are differences in the world. And I think this is why some people find it difficult to understand that you can find joy alone. And feel hurt when you say that. Actually, I'd rather be by myself than be with you. That, for a non-autistic person, that's really strange and really weird and hurtful. Whereas for an autistic person, you might just go, okay, yeah, cool, no problem, see you later. That you might not take that as personally if somebody said that to you, because you can empathise. You can empathise with the joy and the value of spending time by yourself. So I've got some kind of vague ideas about how we think about how we increase and improve as autistic people our own lives and our own happiness. And I think the first thing is about self-knowledge. You need to kind of, and I think historically people have often said that autistic people are not brilliant at self-reflecting, that we don't always necessarily spend a lot of time kind of going, what do I want? Who am I? What works? What do I not like? Some of us, however, spend our entire lives doing exactly that and being totally self-obsessed. But other people perhaps are not so introspective. Knowing who you are, and I think the diagnosis is very important for a lot of people in that it gives you that kind of framework that says, right, okay, so these are the things that I love and these are the things that I'm great at, but actually there are parts of life that I do have to do because I'm obligated, because I need to survive, I need to earn money, I need to look after my family, that don't necessarily come easily for me. And if you're really stressed, it's difficult to be happy. You've got to kind of do the baseline stuff. You've got to be okay in order to get over that neutral point, the absence of, into somewhere that you can appreciate the birds singing, or a burger, or a nice day out, or a painting or something. I think if you're too stressed, you end up in this hole, and you just can't see anything joyful at all. So one of the things perhaps we need to be thinking about for ourselves, and I absolutely know it's easier said than done, is learning enough about ourselves to be able to understand what it is that we need, and what gives us that joy, and what are the things that we need to kind of work our way around as best we can to make sense of in life, therefore lowering our stress levels, and therefore being able to do that. I think it can become very easy, if you're somebody that experiences a lot of stress and anxiety, to focus on the negatives, to focus on the can'ts, and forget, actually, I did have a joyful moment today. I did enjoy something. I did succeed. I did manage to do something that I find difficult. And it's just sometimes shifting the focus a little bit and remembering, yes, I laughed today. Yes, it went okay, rather than getting sucked into some of those kind of negative thoughts that can overwhelm us at times.